fellow students and professors. Today my group will be talking about intercultural communication. To be more specific, we'll be talking about intercultural misunderstanding from the movie Gung Ho. Gung Ho meaning wholehearted enthusiasm. I'll be the presenter for today. My name is Iman, followed by Ashik. Then Sima will present next, Shidi, and lastly Hafiz. Okay, this will be the content of our presentation. Let's take a brief moment to analyze what we'll be presenting about. Okay, it may seem a lot, but this is it. Next. Okay, so the first topic of the day, the importance of intercultural communication skills. So from our good perspective, intercultural communication skills is important because there is currently an increasingly commonplace to see that the local workforce being led by foreign management, such as those in MNCs, correct? And this is partly due to globalization. So because of this, right, I'm not saying that globalization is a bad thing, but there's a high probability of a mismatch of cultural expectations. So this will eventually lead to several misunderstandings that may occur at the workplace. Hence, the importance of intercultural communication skills. Okay, next, I shall now talk about movie synopsis of the movie Gung Ho. Okay, so the Japanese car company, right, which is owned by this guy, the one in the black suit, it's called Asan Motor Corporation, bought over a car manufacturing plant in America. So he sent over a team of executives, a Japanese team of Japanese executives over to this American plant to manage the whole thing. Hence, the problem is that at this American plant, right, since it's in America, the workforce comes from the local American neighborhoods, which is all of these people, with this guy, the one in the white shirt, being their liaison. Okay, so as expected, what happens next is there's conflicts. It is very apparent as there's a lot of different work cultures and different work attitudes. Hence, you can see that two of them are starting to point fingers at each other already. So this whole movie portrays how this dilemma is being worked out by both sides of the parties. Okay. Next. Okay, these are some of the questions that we wish to address during this whole presentation. The first two help, which is what is the work culture that the Japanese management wanted to implement, and the second one, how did the American workers react to this new working environment. These two questions help us to analyze the whole scenario that is being portrayed throughout the whole movie. Then the third and fourth question, what are the differences between the two work cultures and what can we learn from the Japanese and American working styles, it helps us to get a deeper understanding what the two different cultures were and what are the positive and negative aspects of the working styles. Okay. Then after we answer all these questions, we eventually helps to come to a conclusion, and it helps to answer the last question: how do we avoid intercultural misunderstanding in the workplace? And this is the most important question that hopefully all of you will be able to answer. Okay, I shall now present to Ashik, part of the presentation to Ashik to talk about cultural differences.
Hey, good morning everyone. So I'll be talking about cultural differences. Actually, I'll only be talking about the first three, then Singman will be presenting the next three. So as you can see from the slide, the Japanese portray high context culture, high power distance and social orientation, while the Americans low context culture, low power distance and task orientation. So I'll be explaining what are these terms first. So high versus low context culture. So high context culture, they use less words. So every word that the speaker and the receiver use is very important. So there will be less verbal communication, and people tend to be more reflective towards what they are saying. Low context culture means every word is less important, and they tend to get their point straight to the point. So Japanese, as you can see, high context, Americans low context. So I will show you some of the examples. Okay, the first example is this Han. This is the guy, the Han, the main character. He actually went over to Japan in order to convince the Japanese management to come over and take over the company. So at first, he prepared all his slides and presentation, but when he's presenting, the Japanese management actually just sit down and keep quiet. and just go about, not say go about doing their things, they're actually listening, but this high context culture shown by Han is actually contradicting to the Japanese low context culture, which is just to keep quiet. Actually, Han thought he failed, but a few days later, this Asanoto actually took over the company, to Han's surprise. So the second example is when there's this scene where they're having a baseball game, and Buster, one of the workers, actually cheats. He actually knocked down one of the Japanese players, and instead of making a big hoo-ha, the Japanese actually just kept quiet and just accept defeat. This shows that they have a high context culture. And the last example of context culture is when when Han had a dinner with the Japanese executives, and after the meal, Kazuhiro, one of the workers, wanted to discuss about business. So this is actually a hint for the woman in the table to be dismissed. But Audrey, Han's wife, actually stays and wanted to listen to their business talks. The Japanese management actually is not happy, but they just kept quiet as they are showing a high context. Okay, so I'll move on to power distance. Power distance is actually attitude shown towards different authority. The American exhibit a low power distance, which means they believe that every worker have a right and a say at decision made at work, while the Japanese managers believe that the workers are supposed to follow every orders made by the higher authority. So throughout the movie, there are actually a number of scenes on conflict management. Conflict actually broke out in maybe 3 or 4 times. Okay, so why does this conflict broke out? So the main cause of the cultural misunderstanding is the American thought their value is right and the Japanese value is wrong, and vice versa. So this is the main cause of the cultural misunderstanding. Okay, now move on to task versus social orientation. So the task orientation shown is actually American workers are task oriented, or the Japanese are social oriented. So one of the scenes is Kazuhiro wanted to do morning exercises, but it was ignored by all the workers. So they thought it was a joke. So I'll now pass the presentation to Singman.
Thank you, Aship. So I will continue on the discussion on the cultural differences in terms of the individualism versus collectivism, high and low uncertainty avoidance, as well as in terms of the time orientation. So I'll show you a clip. So before the clips, I'll give you a little bit background of the scene. So the scenario is the business actually is not on the track since the Japanese management took over the company. So the person in white is called Kazuhiro, the plant manager, actually has given a last chance to bring out the business, or else he is deemed is done for his career. Okay, so this is a little bit of the movie. So I hope you all can listen to the speech.
Tomorrow is the boy's birthday. I bought him a bicycle. At Sears, we are medical shops. I cannot put it together. Here are the instructions. Can you do it?
Not tonight.
But I want him to see it when he wakes up tomorrow. Kazuhiro,
Can't you see that I'm working? I have no time.
why do American fathers have time?
Why?
Okay, so
Is the boy's birthday?
So it's quite clear that the Kazuhiro actually shown that he has put his company ahead of his son's happiness, so that his wife actually angry, and he's actually starting to indulge in American culture, and she actually wondered why do American men have time for their children. So the Japanese are actually shown very collectivistic, and they're actually willing to sacrifice their family for the interest of the company, which is shown from the scene. But the American won't do that because they will prioritize their time for their family and over his personal business. So they have shown that the American is more on individualism, while the Japanese is more on collectivism. So another scene, I will show you all.
You know my friend Willie, the guy that works downstairs? See, his kid's going into the hospital to have his tonsils taken out. Willie would really like to be there because he's like this super dad or something. I don't know. The guy just lives for his kids. But work suffers.
Yep. So the American worker, which is not shown in the video, actually failed to apply leave for his children's surgery from the Kazuhiro, the Japanese management. So the American supervisor, the person in blue, Han, actually acts as a bridge between the Japanese and the American cultures. So I actually tried to smooth things out with Kazuhiro by explaining their American cultures to the Japanese. But then the Japanese Kazuhiro actually insists and think that the individual must subscribe for their team's good, whereas in comparison, the American actually values an individual nurturing over the collective achievement. So the next one I will talk about is uncertainty avoidance. So throughout the movie, the American actually very open to accept the new Japanese management when the Japanese first took over the factory. And the American actually accept and take on an unprecedented challenge, and as well as displaying uncompleted cars to the CEO out of urgency. So they have shown that America is actually very low in uncertainty avoidance, which they're very willing to take risks, as well as their tolerances in accepting the behavior that differs from the norm. Whereas the Japanese actually are very high in uncertainty avoidance. They insist on their own way of doing things, their own way of getting things done, and are willing to compromise with American working style. So this you can see throughout the movie. So the last one is in terms of the time orientation. So the American, this can be shown by the American decision to reopen the factory as long as there is a production. So they have more on the short-term oriented, and the Japanese, they are actually pursuing of a long-range goals, and they have the relatively long-term vision, whereas they only consider open a factory when the business is proven sustainable. So next I'll pass on to Shidi for his part.
The previous two presenters, Ashik and Singman, has done an analysis of the cultures shown in the movie. So now let's take a look at something closer to home, the Singapore work culture. The local workplace hierarchy is one of high power distance, where generally bosses expect complete obedience from the workers, and in turn the workers play their part by readily accepting orders, or some of them even expect to be given orders. For the younger generation, it is common for the bosses and the workers to interact as friends, and workers also have more freedom to take initiative without having to ask for approval. The local work culture is also very collectivistic. When making decisions as a group, we tend to abide by majority wins, and even if you don't agree, you tend to just follow along with the group so as not to upset the group harmony. However, over time we are becoming increasingly individualistic, and this could be due to our exposure to Western culture. Singapore has a low uncertainty avoidance index. We are very adaptable, we are able to take risks, and I think many of us will jump at the chance to work or study overseas, and most of us end up adapting very well actually. Now let's take a look at how the observations from the movie can be applied to the Singapore work culture. First, in terms of power distance, the Japanese management in the movie was quite disconnected from the workers, whereas the American workers were very outspoken, they want to be heard. So applying this to the Singapore work culture, for more traditional organizations, such as the uniform groups, the common worker might be afraid to speak up. So for example, if your boss comes along and asks, how's your workload, how's your day, and then you will say like, oh, it's very good, I'm doing fine, when actually there are problems in your life. So it is important for the company to provide a means to give feedback to upper management. This is compared to the lower power distance organizations such as MNCs, where it is important for the management to maintain a degree of control over decision making, because sometimes it's not practical to accede to the demands of each and every worker. The Japanese in the movie were willing to forego their own needs for the benefit of the company. This is in contrast to the American workers who had a greater desire for work-life balance. A company based in Singapore should set clear company goals. This is to make good use of the local collectivistic workforce. However, there's a danger that the workers might become too obsessed with work. So it is also essential to encourage work-life balance. An example of this is the Blue Sky Friday program. In this program, employees are encouraged to leave work on time on Fridays. And for example, the Ministry of Manpower Office takes this one step further, where employees are allowed to leave half an hour earlier on Fridays and 1 hour earlier for one Friday each month. Now finally, we have uncertainty avoidance. The Japanese management in the movie insists on conducting their own working style, whereas the Americans were more adaptable and they were willing to give the Japanese a chance to run the company and try out the Japanese methods. Now we shall take a look at these two tables over here. The first one shows that Singapore is the best business environment in the world. And the other one, by the World Bank, lists Singapore as the easiest place to do business. The movie has shown us that it is beneficial to be adaptable and open to change. And Singapore's status as a regional business hub proves it. So in moving forward, we should continue to cultivate this open-mindedness in the local workforce. So this marks the end of my part of the presentation. Now I shall hand over to Hafiz, who will end off for the group.
Thank you, Shidi. To summarize what Ashik and Simman has said, the connections and interactions we see throughout the film represents Hofstede's cultural dynamics. We know that the Japanese are very collectivistic, while the Americans are very individualistic. The Americans, they emphasize on home life, capitalizing on individual and what makes them special. The Japanese, however, they put the company above all and they focus more on the well-being of the whole group and its performance. Next is uncertainty avoidance. The Japanese have a high uncertainty avoidance, whereas the Americans have a low uncertainty avoidance. Throughout the film, right, you can see that the Americans have a very prominent just go with it feel, whereas the Japanese, they see the need for structure. Next, the Japanese have a high power distance, whereas the Americans have a low power distance. For the Americans, right, they feel that they have a say in whatever the management is trying to decide on. They have a union or whatever. But for the Japanese, they believe in authority. Like the management word is law. So that's how they differ. Next is the high and low context cultures. Japanese are high, Americans are low. Japanese believe in the harmony within the group itself. So they tend to suppress their personal opinions so as not to shake things up. And the Americans, they just want their opinions to be heard. They are just very loud people, you know, angmos. So, short versus long-term orientation, Japanese very long-term, Americans short-term. Americans, they just wanted the factory to be open so that they can resume their normal lives again. But the Japanese, right, they are very forward-looking. They only thought about opening the factory only when it's proven to be sustainable. Shidi went through a bit on the Singapore work culture and how our Singaporean workers compared to the Japanese and American counterparts. Firstly, we learned that they are less high context and collectivistic. They want to stand out more and differentiate themselves apart from their colleagues. And they have a low uncertainty avoidance, meaning they are more willing to take risks, travel overseas and whatnot. And lastly, they have a hybrid form of power distance. This mainly pertains to the younger generations, meaning they have a relatively low power distance, but they still like respect the elders, you know. And I'm going to go through a bit on how to avoid intercultural misunderstanding in the workplace. Although it's very common sense, but I just go through that. Firstly is respect. Simply respect. Because when you respect people, right, people will respect you back. And it's important for us to respect other people, especially those of other cultures. Next, if you're unsure, just ask. Avoid making any assumptions, because this will prevent any misunderstandings right from the get-go. And it also helps to build your personal relationships with your colleagues. And next is time. People need time to adapt to new practices and environment. So just give them that. And lastly is attitude. When you have a negative outlook on your colleagues' cultural behavior, right, it's going to create animosity in the workplace. So try to have a positive outlook on everything. And as you can see from the film, towards the end, everything worked out actually. Everything worked out actually when the Japanese and Americans learned to accept each other's differences. Okay, ultimately Gung Ho was a very funny movie, and it's very easy to laugh at the dramatized misunderstandings between the Japanese and the Americans. But the problems we see in the movie, right, are very real and they exist in our workplace. So as the world gets more globalized, it's important for us to be mindful of other people's culture so that we are not labeled as ignorant. And the success of international businesses in the market today, right, is much like overcoming the differences between the Americans and the Japanese in the film. It's depend on our ability to set aside our differences and work towards a common goal. And with that, I end our presentation. Thank you.
So is there any questions that you all would, is there any question you all would like to pose to us? Or can any of you guys list us one of the ways that we can avoid intercultural misunderstandings? Maybe the guy with the red.
Then how about you say respect?
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, I have a question for Ricky, just out of personal interest. You have worked in Switzerland before, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So, how was the power distance situation there? Was it like shocking for you, or yeah, how was it?
I feel it's not really shocking for me because I know that there will be a cultural difference, and I researched before that. Yeah, so like I know that the German, as in the Swiss people, right? Is it correct? The Swiss people tend to be more like straightforward, and also they are must be punctual in time. Yeah, that's the two key things that I need to observe.
So, like when you're with your boss and stuff, it's like very comfortable interaction.
Yes,
like that?
correct. And yeah, in terms of time, like if you are, let's say, 5 minutes late for the meeting, then you will do anything. They are very punctual for time.
Yeah, interesting.
You all listed some properties of Singapore workforce. So, may I know if you observed it yourselves, or did you go out and work and kind of talk to the workforce to find out?
So, okay, basically the content we use here is a mixture of what we've read from online guides. For example, there's a lot of guides on expats working in Singapore, and they give advice on how the Singapore workplace is like. And it's also a mixture with our own personal experience. We didn't really go out to do surveys and stuff.
But from my experience before working as a SME at a local company, this wasn't led by forward management. It was a local management. But normally, Singaporeans, normally the traditional, our forefathers, they tend to have the high power distance. But when I was working at internship, I was having my intern there, right? They are slowly trying to change that. They like trying to have a mix of the low power distance and the high power distance. Like I was able to be more outspoken. There was certain autonomy given to me as an executive. So this is from my experience at Italis with what Shiri have mentioned before. Yeah. So with that, is there any more questions? If not, we shall end our presentation, and thank you for your attention.